A woman walks beneath lights so intense they seem almost unbearable. Her robes shimmer with jewels. Golden chains adorn her wrists and neck, so heavy that 2 Roman guards walk alongside her, carrying the weight. She does not weep. She does not plead. Around her, thousands of voices murmur in a language she knows, yet refuses to respond to. She has been moving for 3 hours. She will continue for another 4. The procession stretches endlessly ahead. African lions in cages. Soldiers still bleeding from recent battles shackled. Painted recreations of cities engulfed in flames. All of it progresses slowly through streets thronged with Romans. They have come to witness this exact spectacle behind her. Silence fills the space, reserved for those who will never see the sun set again. Observe her once more. The sunlight catches on her jewels, the robes still regal, the chains still gold. Why does she wear such finery to her execution? Why do they not kill her immediately? This is the scene history has chosen to remember. A captured queen, a Roman triumph, a public display of subjugation. But the story as you think it happened is not fully true. Or perhaps worse, it is true, yet for reasons no historian is willing to admit. To grasp Rome's treatment of queens, one must first understand the roles they were forbidden to occupy. If the evidence of history matters to you, pay attention, for what follows contradicts what you have been taught. Her feet are torn and bleeding, yet she refuses to glance downward. The year is 272 CE. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. While Rome tore itself apart in civil war, she established an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia. Roman legions could not halt her because they were preoccupied with internecine slaughter over the throne. Civil wars, however, eventually end. When Emperor Aurelian finally turned his gaze eastward, her forces collapsed. She fled toward Persia, leading the remnants of her army. They caught her at the banks of the Euphrates. She did not resist. There was nowhere left to flee. Captured rulers were customarily paraded through Rome during triumphs, public celebrations of victory. Defeated kings were displayed in chains, then executed in Tullianum, the stone chamber carved into the Capitoline Hill where Rome's most dangerous foes were strangled or starved, a tradition maintained for 5 centuries. Zenobia would walk through Rome wearing golden chains. Then she would die. This is the story, except that the Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies written 40 years after her capture, claims she was adorned with jewels that glistened in the sunlight. Why lavish such splendor on someone destined to die? Every ancient account emphasizes one striking detail. She retained extraordinary composure throughout the ordeal. Why do all observers highlight her dignity? What were they seeking in her behavior? Aurelian captured Zenobia in 272 CE, but did not parade her through Rome until 274 CE, 2 years later. Standard practice dictated immediate display. Vercingetorix appeared in Caesar's triumph mere months after his capture. Jugurtha was paraded the same year he surrendered. Why did it take 2 years for Zenobia? Most narratives stop here, stating only that she walked through Rome in chains, that the crowds jeered, calling it humiliation. They rarely explain what humiliation entailed or why 2 years of preparation were required. Most people stop paying attention here, which is why historical accounts continue to mislead. The golden chains were not mere symbols. They were functional. Roman law concerning war captives was precise. Known as Justgentium, the law of nations, it dictated that military defeat converted free people into property. Once a city fell or an army surrendered, its inhabitants became legally enslaved. Former status, gender, or rank did not protect them. A defeated queen had no legal standing beyond that of an ordinary soldier. In fact, she often had less. Roman citizens were shielded from certain punishments. Flogging a citizen was scandalous. Executing one without trial provoked outrage. Foreign captives held no such rights. They could be displayed, sold, or killed at the discretion of their captors. Rome's earliest legal code, the 12 Tables of the 5th century BCE, explicitly declared prisoners of war the property of the state. If captive queens were legally property, why did Rome treat them differently than ordinary slaves? After Cleopatra's death, her daughter, Cleopatra Selene, was taken to Rome as a child. She was neither executed nor enslaved in the traditional sense. Instead, she was married to a client king and sent to govern Mauritania. Why would Rome legitimize the lineage of a vanquished enemy? Why return royal authority to the child of someone who had sought to annihilate the Republic? Consider 60 CE Britain. King Prasutagus of the Iceni left a will dividing his territory between his daughters and Emperor Nero, a compromise meant to preserve independence while appeasing Rome. Roman officials ignored the will, seized all territory, and declared the kingdom forfeited. Queen Boudica protested. She was publicly flogged in front of her people. Her daughters, likely teenagers, certainly unmarried, were assaulted by Roman soldiers, again publicly, in view of their subjects. Tacitus records these events with unusual bluntness for the time, noting that even Romans were shocked. The problem was that Roman law permitted it, and Roman military culture normalized it. Captured women were considered legitimate spoils of war. It was not controversial, yet Tacitus felt compelled to record that even Romans found it disturbing. What boundary had been crossed? The Romans were not barbarians. They built enduring legal systems, wrote extensively on virtue, justice, and honor, and understood the value of dignity. When they stripped a queen naked and flogged her while her people watched, they were fully aware of their actions. They were not punishing her for wrongdoing. They were demonstrating something. The triumphs, the public ceremonies, and the deliberate choreography of captured royalty paraded through Rome were not mere displays of conquest. They were carefully constructed lessons, proving a point that Rome wanted subjugated populations to believe. To comprehend this fully, one must examine the period between capture and parade. Captive queens underwent a process barely documented in Roman records. They were not sent immediately to prisons. They were held, prepared, and conditioned. The months, sometimes years, preceding the triumph were part of a deliberate strategy of psychological and political control, a method of asserting dominance that was both subtle and brutal. Zenobia's golden chains, her composed demeanor, her jewels catching the Mediterranean sun, all of it was intentional. She was property, yet elevated, made to demonstrate the might and order of Rome. The law, custom, and public spectacle all intertwined to communicate an unmistakable message. Even queens were subject to Rome's will. Those who came to witness the procession saw more than a defeated ruler. They saw the discipline, the law, and the theatrical enforcement of imperial power, a careful orchestration that codified Rome's supremacy. Zenobia's journey through the streets of Rome was a performance, a lesson for the empire and its enemies alike. And yet, amid all this display, she retained her dignity, refusing to bend to the spectacle designed to humiliate her. She walked, bleeding, adorned, unbroken. The triumph was not merely a victory of arms. It was a calculated assertion of authority, a message encoded in chains, jewels, and the careful timing of 2 years between capture and public parade. In understanding Zenobia's ordeal, one begins to grasp the sophisticated cruelty of Roman triumphs, the legal and cultural frameworks that governed conquest, and the exceptional resilience required of those who, though enslaved, could not be broken in spirit. The Historia Augusta notes that Zenobia's weakened state during captivity was not the result of torture, but of careful, calculated deprivation. Guards had to support her as she walked in the procession, not because she had been beaten, but because months of controlled starvation and stress had drained her strength. Her robes remained intact, her jewels untarnished, her body bore no marks of deliberate injury. The deprivation was precise, just enough food to survive, insufficient to maintain muscle or vitality. Roman military doctors understood nutrition intimately. They knew exactly how much grain, protein, and water would keep her alive while ensuring gradual physical decline. Her rations were delivered inconsistently, sometimes twice in a day, sometimes once every 2 days. The unpredictability prevented her body from adjusting. Sleep was constantly disrupted. Guards rotated shifts with maximal disturbance. Doors slammed at random hours. Conversations were conducted near her cell at odd times. Torches were replaced in the middle of the night, denying her long periods of darkness. The cell was never fully dark, never fully silent, never predictable. Isolation alternated with forced interaction. Days of complete silence left her alone with her thoughts and the increasing weakness in her limbs, fed through a slot like an animal. Then came abrupt interrogations. Questions about Palmyra's treasury, her generals, her son's whereabouts. Questions she had already answered, questions with no purpose other than to compel her engagement, to remind her that she was still human enough to respond. Then silence returned. Not enough to visibly harm her body, but sufficient to ensure she could not walk without assistance. When the day came for her to march through Rome, she required Roman hands to keep her upright. The symbolism was deliberate. She would try to walk on her own, fail, and Rome would be there to support her. There was another element in the preparation barely mentioned by sources. Captive royalty were made to watch. They observed executions, gladiatorial combats, and staged displays of Rome's triumphs. Cassius Dio mentions this during the description of captives from De Sabilis Dacian Wars. Months before Trajan's triumph, prisoners were brought to the Colosseum, not to fight, but to observe. They saw criminals thrown to beasts, gladiators bleed out in the sand, prisoners of war executed in elaborate reenactments of Roman victories. They sat in special sections, guarded but visible to the crowd. Observers could see their reactions. Why? So captives would understand mercy, and more importantly, the consequences of defiance. By the time Zenobia walked in golden chains, she had already witnessed what happened to those Rome deemed dispensable. She had seen men torn apart by dogs, gladiators die while crowds cheered, defeated soldiers reduced to entertainment. She knew what execution looked like, and her audience knew she knew. Before triumphs, captive royalty were meticulously prepared. They were bathed, dressed in royal garb, adorned with restored jewels. Ancient sources note that Zenobia's robes were repaired where campaign dirt had damaged them. Professional jewelers polished her ornaments. Her hair was styled in the Palmyrene tradition. Every detail was exact. The point was never mercy, it was contrast. The message was not, look at our captive. It was look at power, stripped of its ability to protect itself. Imagine the crowd. A woman in silks worth more than a Roman's annual earnings, jewels representing the wealth of a kingdom, every element screaming royalty and authority, yet unable to walk unaided. A queen who once commanded armies, signed treaties with Persia, administered justice over millions, executed enemies, pardoned allies, minted coins bearing her face alongside emperors, claiming parity with Rome itself. Now she walked in chains, supported by Roman hands. The contrast was deliberate. That was the essence of the 2 years of preparation. A figure of majesty rendered physically dependent, a living symbol of Rome's power over even the most exalted rulers. Roman triumphs were a form of psychological warfare, but not primarily against the defeated queen. They sent a message to her subjects, to allied kingdoms, to potential rebels. The subtext was clear. Divine right could not save her, military might could not protect her, political authority could not shield her, and yet she survived, weakened and displayed. This explains why some queens lived, while most kings perished immediately after their triumphs. Bursting, the chieftain who united tribes against Caesar, was executed within hours. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, starved in the Tullianum over 6 days while Rome celebrated above. Simon Bar Giora, leader of the Jewish revolt, was strangled in the Forum during Titus's triumph. Zenobia, in contrast, received a villa outside Rome. Sources claim her daughters married Roman senators. Why spare her? The answer lies not in Rome's treatment of enemies, but in its strategy toward allies. By the 3rd century CE, Rome controlled lands from Britain to Mesopotamia. Stationing legions everywhere was impossible. The empire had roughly 30 legions, about 150,000 soldiers, one for every 300 people. Insufficient for occupation, enough only to punish. Rome relied on client kings, local rulers who maintained their thrones under Roman oversight. This system required credibility. Client rulers had to believe cooperation would be rewarded, but defiance meant complete annihilation. They ruled through fear, not merely fear of conquest, but fear of irrelevance, that their achievements, their kingdoms, their bloodlines, their children would vanish into Rome. Capturing a queen posed a choice. Demonstrate absolute dominance to deter rebellion while preserving the possibility of future alliances. Zenobia's survival served that purpose. Her chains, her golden robes, her weakened body conveyed the ultimate lesson. Power could be admired but rendered powerless by Rome, and anyone who resisted would face the same carefully calculated consequences. To execute her swiftly and cleanly would have made her a martyr. Her people would remember her as a hero, a queen who chose death over submission. Resistance would become noble, sacrifice honorable. Stories of such courage inspire future generations. Rome understood this, having witnessed Spartacus' execution spark 3 more slave revolts in the following century. So Zenobia lived. She remained visible, aged, ordinary in the eyes of her people. Her daughters married Roman men. Her grandchildren spoke Latin. Her bloodline was absorbed into the empire that destroyed her. Her people saw power dissolve into irrelevance. Execution creates legends. Survival provokes questions. Zenobia spent her final 30 years in a villa outside Rome. Ancient sources do not tell us what she did there. Did she write? Receive visitors? Maintain correspondence with Palmyra? Did her daughters visit? We do not know. Consider what survival meant. Waking each day in a Roman villa, eating Roman food, speaking Latin because no one around her spoke Palmyrene. Watching her daughters marry into families whose fathers had conquered her empire. Watching grandchildren grow up as Romans, safe, unpunished, unbroken, yet irrelevant. Execution ends the story. The queen becomes legend. Her people can claim she died rather than submit. Survival, however, forces reflection. Was resistance worth it? If the answer might even seem no, why resist again? Now think back to Boudica, her public flogging, her daughter's violation in front of the Iceni people. Rome did not act to break her spirit through cruelty alone. They acted deliberately to provoke. Gradual subjugation, Rome had learned, often fueled resistance. Immediate, total annihilation crushed uprisings completely, as with Boudica. 80,000 Britons killed in a single afternoon. Her vastly larger army was annihilated through discipline and strategy. Tacitus records that she poisoned herself rather than face capture. Her defeat was so absolute, so bloody, that Britain remained quiet for 3 generations. A living Boudica could have become a symbol of defiance, a rallying point. A dead Boudica, crushed decisively, became a warning. Rome understood something history often ignores. The cruelest thing to do to a queen is not to kill her, but to let her live long enough to witness her legacy fade. If stories like these vanish, societies repeat the same mistakes. Crimson Historians exists to preserve them. But the story of conquest and survival does not end with death. It continues in the subtle transformations Rome imposed. 3 generations later, Cassius Dio writes of British queens with a tone bordering on anxiety. He describes Queen Cartimandua of the Brigantes, a Roman ally who handed over the fugitive Caratacus and maintained peace for decades. His language emphasizes her political marriages, diplomacy, and negotiation skills. He never mentions her military capability, never suggests she ruled through strength. Rome had successfully redefined what queenship could mean. Not warriors, not strategists, not threats. After Zenobia, no Eastern queen challenged Rome for 2 centuries. Palmyra, once ruled by queens since the 1st century CE, crowned none thereafter. Not due to law, but memory. Similarly, after Boudica, Celtic tribes in Britain ceased placing women in military command. Archaeological records confirm this shift. Warrior burials that once included women abruptly stopped after 60 CE. This was learned behavior. Rome's method was psychological as much as legal. Rome itself, of course, eventually fell in 476 CE. The empire that mastered breaking queens without killing them collapsed from within, weakened by succession crises, civil war, and unstable leadership. Rome never successfully established female succession. Imperial wives and mothers wielded enormous shadow power, yet this ambiguity created instability. Agrippina, Livia, Julia, and other powerful women operated through sons and husbands because direct rule was impossible. The very system that broke foreign queens undermined Rome's ability to stabilize its own elite women. Zenobia's villa still exists, a ruin outside Rome, rarely marked, seldom visited. No tours, no plaques. Meanwhile, the Tullianum prison where male captive kings were executed is preserved and celebrated. Visitors can stand in the cells where Vercingetorix died or where Jugurtha starved. Guided tours recount every hour. But there is no memorial for queens. No marker for Boudica's daughters, whose names are lost. No monument to women who survived triumphs and decades of living under Roman control. History remembers executions, it forgets survival. Survival was not mercy, it was a punishment prolonged for years. Even today, society measures power in similar ways. Not with chains or triumphs, but by who breaks publicly and who remains composed. We still ask of powerful women, did she cry? Did she beg? Did she maintain dignity? Technology changes, the spectacle evolves, but the impulse remains. History asks, what happened to captured queens? The better question is, what did Rome need captured queens to become for the empire to function? And do we, as societies, continue needing the same? A 6th century Syrian chronicler preserves what may be a quotation from Zenobia, though impossible to verify. In my time, I was one of the most powerful women in the East. Now I am an ornament in a Roman garden, useful only as proof that resistance ends in decoration. The point is clear. Zenobia's life after capture was a living testament to Rome's power. Survival became the punishment. She died sometime around 274 CE. We do not know where. We do not know who mourned her. That absence was intentional. That ultimately was the lesson Rome intended history to preserve.